The bloodline of betrayal, the tragic legacy of Egypt's pharaohs. His great-grandparents were siblings, a union that would sow the seeds of profound genetic strife within their lineage. With each breath he took, he grappled with the toxic legacy coursing through his veins, an insidious genetic deterioration that foreshadowed a life of suffering. Imagine growing up as a living god only to have your body betray you daily. A spine that curved painfully, a jaw that refused to close properly, and the reliance on a walking stick by the tender age of 16. Palace servants gossiped about the curse that loomed over his bloodline like a relentless shadow. While the complexities of genetics were beyond his comprehension, science would not even exist for millennia. He sensed that something was tragically amiss in his family. His parents and grandparents, steadfast in their belief, viewed the purity of their blood as a sacred duty worth any sacrifice, even if it cost them their children's well-being. They witnessed the untimely deaths of infants and rationalized them as manifestations of divine will, creating a grim paradise that paraded as a holy legacy. What if I told you this isn't mere fiction? The most powerful figures in history, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, spent 3 millennia systematically annihilating their bloodline through relentless genetic isolation. Convinced that their blood was divine, too sacred to intermingle with mortals, these rulers inadvertently crafted an elaborate chamber of human suffering that resonated through the eons. To truly understand why the pharaohs married their sisters, an act ensconced in a tragic cultural tradition, we must journey back to the origins of Egyptian civilization. The pharaohs never intended for their royal lineage to erode. They believed that they were safeguarding a divine heritage. The first pharaoh envisioned his sister as the only suitable companion, and in his eyes, the thought of his celestial essence mingling with the blood of commoners was unbearably repugnant. His priests acquiesced, nodding approvingly at the ancient rites, while his advisors calculated the political benefits. Few were willing to recognize the toll such decisions would exact on future generations. To the pharaohs, kingship was far more than governance. It was a divine monarchality, a flesh and blood embodiment of Horus, direct descendants of Ra himself. How could a god entwine with a mortal? How could their divine lineage risk contamination by human frailty? The answer was painfully straightforward. Gods must unite with gods. Siblings were deemed the rightful partners, as maintaining a pure bloodline was essential to preserving their divine status. From this tenet, a cultural obsession emerged. Royal siblings were indoctrinated to believe that their unions were not only acceptable, but fundamentally necessary to maintain the purity of their blood. They were taught that their lineage was imbued with the very essence of Ra, and mingling with foreign blood would incite the wrath of the gods, jeopardizing the kingdom's stability. With each successive generation, they condemned their offspring to endure the torturous consequences of convictions they never dared challenge. At first, the consequences appeared subtle. Slight jaw irregularities or unusual facial features proud to be attributed to divine favor, viewed as evidence of godly blessing. Yet, the genetic affliction accumulated imperceptibly like layers of sediment in the Nile River, gradually poisoning the very foundation of their exalted lineage. What began as an effort to preserve divinity became a cycle of ruin concealed beneath generations of ignorance. A royal child born with a clubfoot was praised as a manifestation of divine will, while a young prince who succumbed at the tender age of 20 was reverently proclaimed to have returned to serve in the afterlife. A princess unable to bear healthy children was exalted for her higher spiritual purpose. Such genetic disasters were misinterpreted as manifestations of favor from the divine. The ancient Egyptians were nothing short of brilliant. They erected monuments that still tower majestically today, developed mathematical concepts that continue to astound scholars, and created one of the earliest written languages. Yet, in their pursuit of perfection, they were blindsided to the devastating consequences lurking within the royal family. Court physicians chronicled peculiar ailments and premature deaths, but failed to tie them to the obvious cause rooted in their cultural practices. The evidence lay scattered throughout centuries of royal tombs, yet their unwavering faith obscured the truth staring them in the face. The ticking time bomb of genetic decay loomed ominously within every palace nursery, every royal marriage bed, and every prayer uttered for the perpetuation of the divine bloodline. What they believed to be a method of preserving their godly status ultimately unraveled their humanity in a profoundly tragic manner. Nowhere was this more evident than in the royal family that would send shockwaves through the annals of Egypt's history. In the searing heat of the 14th century BCE, a dynasty emerged that would take royal inbreeding to its most documented and grim realization. This tale begins with one of Egypt's most controversial pharaohs, Akhenaten. In the sweltering heat of 1353 BCE, a child is born within a palace that overlooks the majestic Nile, destined to inherit a legacy marked by deep turmoil. Before he becomes a heretic king, forsaking the traditional gods of Egypt, he remains solely a boy trapped in a body that rebels against his divine lineage. His physical form deviates sharply from the idealized images portrayed in temple murals. An elongated skull reminiscent of taffy, wide hips, and a chest that bears the unmistakable signs of abnormal development. Surrounded by servants who avert their eyes and courtiers whispering sequential reassurances, the young prince embodies a tragic disconnect between his divine image and his reality. Even within the sumptuous walls of the palace, he gazes into polished bronze and confronts a visage that starkly contrasts with the statues of god-kings that line the temples. His gait is unsteady. His voice is a discordant note against the harmony of royal expectation. In a palace where whispers become the norm, servants learn to overlook his unique physique, while priests are tasked with crafting elaborate rationalizations to justify the future god-king's appearance. His parents, products of generations steeped in sibling unions, convince themselves that their son's peculiarities are reflections of divine favor. When he finally ascends to the throne as pharaoh, Akhenaten initiates a radical departure. He commissions artists to portray the royal family authentically for the first time. Revolutionary or not, it's a painful reflection of a deeper truth: his exhaustion with the charade. If his body serves as a temple for the gods, then surely the divine must reflect his own image. The artwork from his reign presents an unsettling spectacle: elongated heads, feminine forms within masculine bodies, and children who mirror their parents' disturbing proportions. Modern viewers often mistake these portrayals as mere artistic liberties, but they document a horrifying reality of genetic degradation, so profound that the royal narrative could no longer obscure it. In a significant twist, Akhenaten marries the renowned Queen Nefertiti, and together they welcome 6 daughters into a realm overshadowed by tragedy. Records hint at sons lost to infancy, their fragile forms unable to withstand the harsh genetic burdens passed down through generations. The daughters who survive inherit their father's disquieting features, embodying the same elongated contours and strange proportions. While palace artists extol their divine beauty, whispers abound among servants about the princesses who shrink away from sunlight, battling simple tasks deemed beneath their royal stature. Perhaps Akhenaten's bold religious revolution stemmed from a desperate plea for redemption. If the established gods had cursed his lineage, might a new god offer salvation? He moved the capital from Thebes to a newly established city, Amarna, severing ties with the ancient power centers of Egypt while claiming the mantle of sole divine interpreter. The groundbreaking relocation ultimately manifests as an exercise in royal isolation, distanced from the traditional power dynamics in an environment ill-fitted for convalescence. Tragically, the revolutionary monarch's life is fated to be short-lived, as are most of the male heirs in his family. The beliefs he championed wither in the face of succession, and the grand city of Amarna falls into ruin, its architecture fading under the relentless desert sun. His name is carved away from monuments, his legacy vilified by the very priests whose idols he dared to challenge. Yet the insidious curse of genetic degradation lingers, finding its way to the next generation, burdening the son of this heretic king not only with a throne, but with an inherited DNA so compromised that each breath becomes a labor from the mistakes of his forebears. Born in 1341 BCE, this boy, named Tutankhamun, is doomed to carry the weight of his father's legacy, magnificently tragic. Imagine being merely 9 years old and grappling with a gait burdened by a twisted foot. The young king's left foot turns inward, a condition known today as clubfoot, making each step an agonizing trial. His spine bends abnormally, subjecting him to positing constraints that transform the act of assuming a throne into a painful ordeal. Breathing becomes a labor, further compounded by a malformed chest not suited to the arid Egyptian climate. Amid the opulence of the palace, physicians are in constant attendance, but they remain powerless against the damage wrought by preceding generations. The cruel irony of Tutankhamun's life unfolds against a backdrop of worship, for he is revered as a living god even as his body crumples under the weight of its flaws. As subjects prostrate themselves before this fragile boy who requires a walking stick merely to traverse his own chamber, the ceremonies designed to highlight his divine power become elaborate displays of concealed vulnerability. Historical records uncovered millennia later narrate a heartbreaking tableau of royal healthcare. More than 130 walking sticks are ultimately interred alongside the young ruler, a testament not to divine strength, but to desperate aids for a fragile body. Some of these aids are plain canes, while others are elaborately crafted golden staffs. Yet, all serve a singular purpose: to sustain the illusion of a god among men. Tutankhamun grows up ensconced in golden solitude, privy to luxury, yet deprived of authentic human connection. Peers are kept at arm's length, both to shield him from scrutiny and to maintain the pretense about his condition. His union with Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, further entwines their fates in a web of genetic suffering as they bear the same hereditary burdens, making the likelihood of offspring severely compromised, leading to miscarriages and stillbirths, silent witnesses to the tragic incompatibility of their entwined lineage. The psychological torment inflicted upon Egypt's pained prince cannot be overstated. Enclosed within temple walls adorned with imagery portraying invincible pharaohs, idealized ancestors, Tutankhamun can't help but wonder why he so starkly diverges from their radiant visages. The artist tasked with capturing his likeness face an insurmountable challenge, striving to render a genetic calamity as divine. Eschewing realism, they resort to stylized renditions that fail to convey the reality of the fragile boy seated on the throne. Among the scribes, physicians, and artists document the shape of this broken pharaoh's condition, creating what modern scholars deem a pioneering record of the effects of inbreeding. They catalog his skeletal deformities, his compromised immune functions, and hormonal imbalances, noting the frequent bouts of illness and the struggle to gain weight in a land overflowing with abundance. However, what they fail to detect is that they are recording the inevitable fallout of centuries steeped in insular practices. At just 19 years of age, Tutankhamun's compromised immune system finally succumbs, unable to fend off even a mild strain of malaria, an ailment typically survivable for robust individuals. As he succumbs to fever, seeking solace in the gilded walls of his palace, perhaps he realizes what his physicians cannot. His suffering was not mere divine fate. It was the cumulative effect of ancestral decisions prioritizing political purity over human health. The young pharaoh departs this world prematurely, leaving behind a legacy that would only be discovered again in a modern context, as Howard Carter unveils his tomb in 1922. The very hybridization that rendered his life so painfully tragic ultimately gives him a claim. His early demise ensures his tomb remains largely untouched, preserving it for contemporary archaeologists. In 2010, advancements in DNA technology uncover the tragic truth behind his suffering. He was the progeny of brother-sister unions, a victim of royal policies that treated lineage as mere fodder for political aspirations. One might wish that Tutankhamun's demise would serve as a cautionary tale, prompting future rulers to reconsider the consequences of genetic isolation. However, the corrupting influence of power often eclipses inconvenient truths. The allure of pure bloodlines proved seductive, blinding them to the dangers inherent in their lineage. Yet the story does not reach its conclusion with Tutankhamun's death. Instead, it prolongs itself across centuries, spanning dynasties, enduring through the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Centuries later, in the twilight of Egyptian independence, foreign conquerors would gaze upon the same temple walls that inspired Akhenaten's family. They would read the same texts justifying royal inbreeding and resolutely decide to repeat experiments that had already wrought havoc on the lives of their predecessors. This cycle plays out when Alexander the Great's empire fragments and his general Ptolemy seizes Egypt for himself. 1,200 years after the tragic passing of Tutankhamun, Egypt finds itself under the dominion of a conqueror who would find the same misguided justification nestled within the walls of history and unwittingly continue a legacy of suffering born from the belief in divine blood. Subscribe to Historic Horizon and hit the bell icon to explore more captivating stories from Europe's rich past. Like, share, and comment to support our journey and help us bring history to life for everyone.